minute early. We'll just wait for everyone to kind of shuffle in. So hello everyone, this is Akhil from Green Story. We're starting off the webinar in about a couple of minutes, just waiting for everyone to come in, but feel free to type your questions or introductions on chat as everybody's coming in, and we'll get to them sooner or later, and we will be responding as well. I see people coming in now. So we're just going to give it a few more seconds, and we'll kick things off. All right, let's start. So hi everyone, my name is Akhil and I'm the co-founder of Green Story, and welcome to our webinar series on zeroing in on neutrality. The purpose of the series is to really showcase carbon offsetting from all angles and really getting to know the perspective of each and every stakeholder out there. And I'm really pleased to be hosting this great panel today. Joining us are 5 individuals and organizations who really have a strong expertise in community engagement and development around supply chains and carbon offsets. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions, and if you have them, please type them out in our question or chat box, and we get to them after our discussion. But if you want to also participate online, please tag us at Green Story Inc. That's pretty much all the social media handles on Instagram, LinkedIn, or use the hashtag Green Story, and we'll get to it. Just to give a really quick introduction about Green Story, we started the company with a vision to enable every consumer in the world to ask, what's my impact, before they make a purchase. And as a company, we work with brands ranging from startups to global giants to measure the impact of their supply chains and visualize it for our customers. And quite recently, I'm very happy to have launched our newest product on carbon offsets, so that as brands, you can not only make your products carbon neutral, but really involve and integrate consumers into the whole process. And without any further ado, I'd like to thank the amazing panel that's joining us today. And moderating this whole thing is Vera Belazelkowska. Oh, I got that right, Vera. Vera has years of experience directing projects in a variety of industries, and that plus 10 years of experience in international work that's focusing on community engagement, financial inclusion, and education in parts of Asia, East Africa, and the Americas. And as the director of programs at Ulula, she leads the design and implementation of programs to monitor human rights impacts in global supply chains. With that being said, it's over to you, Vera.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. I am going to try my best to moderate this fruitful discussion on an environmental topic that really is not perhaps my wheelhouse. As Akhil mentioned, my background's in community engagement and stakeholder engagement, but and also business and human rights and impacts of business and global supply chains. But as environment and people are so interlinked, environmental rights are human rights as well, and protecting the planet means protecting the planet for people and those also most vulnerable. So I think there's a really nice intersection here. So I really look forward to learning from our experts on today's panel. We are joined by Eric Dales, co-founder and director of Tamga Designs, Katya Nicholas, founder of Good Karma, Esther Rojena, Associate Director of Global Sourcing, South Pole, and Casper Coppermann, the co-founder and director of the Green Branch. So I really look forward to that. House rules, as Akil mentioned, please type in your questions throughout the discussion. We can try to get to it during our engagement. Also, we'll make sure to have 10 to 15 minutes at the end to make sure we go through some of your questions. Just to frame the topic a little bit before I hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves and their companies, it's the main question we're going to be trying to tackle today is really what good does carbon offsetting do, and how can it really help us build a better future for communities around the globe. Carbon offsets have hit a record high. In 2019, there were 100 million metric tons that were offset. It's still a fraction of the 37 billion metric tons that are emitted, but really it is in recent years we've seen carbon offsetting become a type and a nature of project that is really advancing. It's evolving. It's becoming a really important new green initiative that brands can leverage to try to offset some of their emissions. It's really gone beyond proof of concept, and now we're really seeing it deployed and impacting communities around the globe. It has a borderless nature. So, of course, it has positive outcomes for people across the globe, but, of course, very direct positive outcomes for communities that host these projects. And the importance of engagement of communities when projects are designed and implemented is so important because, as we think about different interventions and initiatives, making sure that they are locally relevant and impactful is a key priority, as well as the opportunity that it can create jobs. It can also introduce locals to enter this offset market and create an additional source of income. There's a skill transfer. There's, of course, new capital for entrepreneurs locally who are implementing these renewable energy projects. So the benefits are many. But there's, of course, like with any initiative, there are some challenges, and we'll be hearing from our panel today how they're trying to overcome challenges of permanence, transparency, and also this, oftentimes what in the business world we would term a silver bullet. So anytime something is promising, it's very tempting to think this is going to solve our problems. But of course, this is just one way and one initiative that can help advance us in the environmental impact that businesses leave behind. But of course, it's not revolutionizing the operation and the emissions in the first place. So how can it be complemented and become a part of something bigger? So these will be the topics we'll be covering today. And now I will hand over to Eric to introduce himself and his company.
Thanks very much, Vera. Hi, everybody. So nice to be here. I'm the co-founder and operations director at Tumga Designs. We create vibrant and colorful women's fashion from the world's best sustainable materials. From day one, when we started in 2016, we really prioritized building a fully transparent supply chain from the raw material all the way up to the finished garment. And we work with a range of incredible partners in Indonesia to do so. Our mission is really to prove that sustainability can be exciting. From day one, that was the first principle. And now we're fortunate enough to have a community across more than 40 countries of customers and retailers who are kind of on this ride with us.
Katya, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. My name is Katya, and I'm the founder of Good Krama. Good Krama is a sustainable fashion label that upcycles textile waste from Southeast Asian factories and blends it with traditional weaving techniques and textiles supporting weaving communities in rural Cambodia. We're all about social justice, environmental awareness, and empowering our customers to make conscious decisions by being radically transparent with them.
Great, thank you. And Esther.
Hi, everyone. Very excited to also participate in this discussion on behalf of South Pole. My name is Esther Loena, and I am heading our Global Sourcing Origination Unit. A few words about South Pole. So South Pole is a Zurich-born carbon project developer, whereby we have developed globally roughly a bit more than 700 projects, with a focus on community-led nature-based solutions as conservation, restoration projects, but also the distribution of household devices as clean cook stoves or water filters and We're actually very proud that over the past 15 years, we have engaged with a variety of international large brands, our corporate investors and clients with whom we have jointly, up until now, retired roughly 80 million tons of emission reduction over the past 15 years.
Amazing. And last but not least, Casper.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon in the Netherlands and good morning to you guys. So my name is Casper Coppermann. I'm one of the founders and one of the directors of the Green Branch. We are project developers of reforestation and landscape restoration projects in which we aim to close the gap between the ecology and the economy. We do this by using carbon credits as a means towards our goal, which is a large-scale landscape level landscape restoration. And in doing so, we believe in being really transparent in what we do, certifying all the impact we make so that you can make verified claims on what actually happens, and trying to make visible what plays off so far away of where we emit.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for those introductions. Very inspiring, and it's just amazing to see that we can fill up a panel to just simply talk about this, but also from a variety of different perspectives. So I will begin by first probing a little bit more and hearing the experience of the brands on our call. So Eric, we can start with you and Katja. But my first question would be, what is really your brand's driving philosophy behind integrating carbon offsets, and also maybe other green initiatives that could potentially come before offsets, perhaps further upstream? Why do you do it, and why do you track it?
I suppose I'm unmuted, so I'll hop on this one. Right. So if we're looking at it through a lens of carbon, I mean, our first step in looking at carbon offsets is not looking at carbon offsets; it's at reducing carbon emissions in the first place. So everything, like I alluded to in the intro there, everything that we do from day one has started with the raw materials. So in material selection, we really look at the in terms of the fibers, in terms of the dyes that we're using, in terms of the packaging that we're using, the transportation between different factories and locations. We're looking at using basically the product, the materials and the processes that use the least amount of carbon in the first place. So if we can reduce those before they happen, that's great. A little backstory for us is that we actually, when we started Tamga and we were looking for our kind of primary material to use, that's when we actually figured out that viscose fiber comes from wood. And a lot of consumers may not know that viscose fiber actually comes from wood pulp. We saw in Indonesia that some of the ancient and endangered rainforests there were actually being cleared to create plantations for viscose staple fiber material. So right away, we knew that we wanted to find a sustainable source of viscose, which we work now with lensing. We use Micro Tencel, Tencel, and Lensing Modal and Lensing EcoVero. So they're coming from FSC certified plots. However, also we started kind of in tandem with an NGO called the Sumatran Orangutan Society, who has great reforestation projects in Sumatra, and they do great community education there as well. So right away, we weren't looking at that as a carbon offset. We were just simply looking at, well, if we're going to be kind of using resources from the environment, then we want to be giving back to it in a constructive way. And my wife and I, who are the founders of the business, both worked in international development previously. So we kind of had an eye to trying to plow some of our benefits from the company back in. Quickly, I mean, we alongside that, we started carbon neutral shipping in 2019, basically just tracking all of our shipping to each customer around the world, tracking the kilometers, doing our own kind of spreadsheet that we built to offset that using gold standard offsets. Earlier this year, we did our first full carbon neutral collection, and that was in tandem with Green Story before this product, the new carbon offset product came out. We just basically, since we've always tracked the offsets of our materials, the emissions of our materials, we just simply worked out how to offset everything all the way to our warehouse and then make sure that we're offsetting to the customer. And then now we have this new product that I was just mentioning with Green Story, where you really get that full traceability of which projects are being used and where the offsets are being used. So that's really kind of the whole scope of how we look at it at Tomga.
Thank you. Yeah, we at Ulula work a lot in the palm oil space. So this is where sectors overlap, because that is one commodity item that, while it's not involved in the fashion sector directly, it's very involved in cosmetics and food, and the deforestation challenges with palm oil in countries like Indonesia and Malaysia are also very similar to what you're describing. So
they're absolutely one and the same, those two challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Katya, tell us a little bit about Good Krama. Krama, I will try to not say karma. I know that rolls off the tongue.
I completely agree with Eric. It's all about, creating a supply chain that has low carbon emissions to begin with, and not just about offsetting. For us in particular, we do this in different ways. For example, we use upcycled materials, and that means that, we're not using the resources and the energy it takes to create new materials and get them shipped to us. So on top of that, we actually have a very centralized supply chain, believe it or not, but everything is sourced and made within an 80-kilometer radius of our ateliers. And that is, a huge way to limit transportation and emissions through that. So textile upcycling is a huge part of our sourcing, but another part of our sourcing is actually creating hand-woven materials supporting rural communities. And that is actually a carbon neutral process in itself, because we're using like manual machines with daylight and outdoors, and it's like, as zero emissions as it can get. And so that's, another huge part of our sourcing. And and then in terms of the finished product, the biggest emissions for us is actually shipping the product to our consumer. And similarly to Tomga Designs, we've been offsetting those emissions. And we've actually been giving the opportunity to our clients to choose whether or not they want to offset their carbon emissions. And we found that, 98% of them will choose to do so if they have the option, which is another great way to empower your customer, to make conscious decisions if they're given all the tools to do so. So, yeah.
That's amazing. So you figured out really, from the source all the way to transportation, how to both adapt your businesses so that you're limiting emissions, but also offsetting what you're not able to actually accommodate and control. So that's really impressive. And maybe Katya, while we still have you, I'm sure there's so many other brands out there that want to think about this, incorporate this. So maybe you can share a little bit about where can sustainability-minded companies start when begin to consider integrating carbon offsets, and how did you decide on the types of projects, locations, and the stage in your supply chain where you incorporated offsets?
Well, for us, it really started, I'm actually an environmental economist by trade. So for me, it was all life cycle analysis of every aspect of the production was already kind of part of the brand's DNA. So it was a perfect match when we started working with Green Story. And so basically for us, the biggest advice I can get is really understand what your impact is in every aspect, and then perhaps choose the biggest, where you emit the most is where maybe you should start. For us, it was shipping direct to consumer and just general shipping of stock of finished products. And I think that's really, I firmly believe that sustainability can take many forms, and small steps is better than no steps at all. So it's definitely, for me, I would suggest, analyzing your supply chain, your emissions, and see where offsetting can have the biggest impact. For us right now, we do offset, like the shipping offset that we do ends up being offsetted in different programs that are directly linked to where the client lives. So that's what we do right now. But with Green Story's new offsetting initiative, we're very keen to be able to explore offsetting directly back to Cambodian communities where we do all of our production. So to be continued.
Yeah, it's a journey. So yeah, great. Thank you. And Eric, how about you guys?
You know what? To be honest, it's a plug for Green Story, but I think that working with Green Story, there's a reason why many of and some other brands are probably listening as well that work with Green Story. They're a third party. They're like another team member, like the environmental expert on your team. That really helps you talk through things like carbon offsetting, things like material selection for us. I'm when we're developing new materials, I'm going through the process with them to track impacts. So when it comes to integrating into your company, look, before Green Story had this product, we started with shipping because we know that we could track that. After that, we decided to look at production, find out exactly what that was. Okay, great. We can buy gold standard offsets. You can find gold standard offsets anywhere. And to me, I don't get too involved in exactly which projects under the gold standard. I like to select them. They have great information on the different projects. But for me, it was just knowing that that standard is applied and that those projects link really well with the SDGs and have a good social component. So if I were saying how to consider it, learn about carbon offsets, so make sure that you're reducing first, as in you're using low carbon materials and processes in the first place. And then talk to Green Story, because honestly, I think you'll find that they have a lot of information on the subject.
Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing your experiences. And now I'll switch gears a little bit to hear a bit from the project developers. And we can start with you, Casper, but can you share a little bit about the role of communities and key stakeholders in how you as an entity determine the best types of carbon offset projects for your partners, or whether you have any other initiatives with other organizations? What are the processes do you follow to develop these offsetting projects? How do you involve local communities in the process? And ultimately, how do you ensure that there's effective stakeholder engagement so that you can adapt the projects to the local setting?
Yeah, well, we think that it is about local. In every phase of the development, you should work with local people, and you should work on engaging those local people. Because just as, tree species, humans can be invasive. So what we have seen in precedents is that, organizations come to a certain part of the country and they bring in lots of money and they say, okay, well, this is how we want to do it. And what we noticed that years later is that the plan doesn't bring the benefits to the local community that they would have liked to see. So naturally, at this point, you will have a conflict. You will have a conflict of interests, wherein the people bringing the project haven't considered people who are taking care of the project. So this almost never works. So what we believe in is actually to have co-creation in the research phase as well as the development phase, to do a real thorough stakeholder analysis and see what their needs are and how they will be affected or benefited by doing a plan a certain way. So in this way, we try to optimize the problem for all stakeholders involved.
That's great. And Esther, how about your organization?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely couldn't agree more with Casper that indeed a very inclusive way of involving the communities from the first moment of project design, actually, and planning the activities is really crucial here to understand what is really needed on the ground. And I think in addition, obviously, also other stakeholders are very, very important here to be included, as I really see this as a multi-stakeholder engagement process. I mean, as we have been now approaching the Paris time, also all the national, or at least most of the national governments have also made some pledges in terms of what are their national targets and ambitions in terms of climate policy. So we also always analyze that and factor that into our possibilities, what type of projects we can develop on the ground. This is also how we actually advise the other important stakeholder here, which are namely our corporate investors who are interested in indeed funding these projects. And here we really see also that it's really important that to get them involved and also engaged from the start into the projects. So what we have seen now as a very positive trend actually over the last years, that most of our corporate clients are not interested anymore to just offset in that sense their emissions with buying or purchasing 100,000 tons of carbon credits and that's it, but they actually want to co-create and co-develop projects with us. And here we can really see, and I actually just got off a call with one of our corporate clients before this session, where they actually asked us, okay, how can we actually engage our own employees in this process? And it's a technical service provider. So they came up with great ideas. If they could not send some of the engineers to the ground and actually hold a workshop and build up an educational program and see how, you know, the communities on the ground can actually benefit from this in addition to the emission reduction, which would be created by the project.
Yeah, it's quite an involved process. Of course, you know, the bad news is this never ends. It's an ongoing process with lots of consultations and lots of stakeholder groups. The good news is that, you know, it gives you time to iterate and learn and iterate again, so you don't have this one shot to get it right. So of course, when it comes to involving multiple stakeholders, you really have to go through that process. There's no way around it. If you don't consult, you're bound to create a project that fails to deliver the impacts and outcomes that you intend. And maybe you can share a little bit about some of the impacts of carbon offsetting for communities, especially communities that are most impacted by climate change. And how do these impacts evolve over the long run? How do you see that changing and evolving and hopefully progressing in a way that we have more positive outcomes and reducing the negative?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, usually the most marginal communities are the most impacted by climate change. And I generally think that these type of offset projects really give an opportunity for long-term positive impact beyond actually just reducing carbon emissions, but actually co-creating additional co-benefits for health, water access, etc. I think one important part here is really to see that carbon projects are designed as long-term projects. So usually their duration is really meant to be there for 15 to 30 years, depending on the project type, to actually secure long-term finance and long-term income stream for the communities. And therefore here, obviously, it's really important to create from the start a very clear and fair benefit sharing model with the communities, so that they can actually profit from this additional income stream and include that in the further development. I think in addition to this, really, as I mentioned before, further job creation at project sites, if you look especially at projects like forest conservation, renewable energy projects is really important here. And I think what Eric just mentioned before around the sustainable development goals, I think they really play now a crucial part also when you look at actually the certification of carbon projects, where really standards like the gold standard, BERA, etc., have made that mandatory to actually quantify co-benefits and then match them against the SDGs.
Yeah, this is where the intersection of environmental protection, of course, is constantly interplaying with the societal benefits. So not just measuring metric tons, but actually measuring the community impacts of the projects is really what will give you the full picture of the type of impact you're having. Yeah, that's great insight. And Casper, how about your organization? What are the impacts that you're seeing in communities, and how do you see them evolving in the long run?
Well, you are absolutely right, and I think Esther had a great point when she talked about long-term additionality, because when we approach a farm, no farmer is inviting us and saying, "Oh, that's just what we needed, more carbon to store on our farms." No, they are interested because you bring a whole different kind of additionality to them. And so this is also something that we try to educate them on. And well, over a very long term still, it should kind of create its own abundance, because these people actually making the project work, they should at one point understand why it is good to do regenerative agriculture in a certain kind of way, why it is not good to have monoculture, why we need the forests and how they can benefit from the forest. and this is something that we try to communicate always, not only to our clients, but especially to the farmers and to the local community, so that they actually see, okay, well, it is another way than what we have been doing now, but we understand why it is better for us. So I think this closes the loop. Yeah, and you can actually solve multiple problems with the same solution.
Yeah, yeah. It's we've all seen the big pilot graveyard, the graveyard of lots of little good ideas and pilot projects that don't end up working, not because they're bad ideas, but because maybe they're working in silos. But if we were to collaborate and really think through the issue more holistically, and bring in the right partners from the start, you're really setting up the project for success. And I'll try to get now the thoughts of the brands again, a little bit about this kind of the idea of the debate between carbon offsetting as neutralization, but maybe potentially the slow progress on reduction. And you have both made it very clear that this is a very important central piece to how your brands got started. You didn't want to just offset, but rather you wanted the core of your business and the way you source and the product development to be very much embedded in sustainability, with the SDGs in mind. But maybe you can speak a little bit about that in the market, like where do offsets fit for you and other brands, but then also where do offsets seem to fit for other international brands, and a little bit chiming in a little bit about this debate between neutralization and kind of business as usual with neutralization versus changing the way we do things.
Well, I mean, I can kind of jump in. I do think that carbon offsetting has been used as a band-aid to kind of not see or refuse to see the larger picture. And while I do think it's one step, it's definitely not the only step to take. And I mean, I think even the concept of carbon footprint, I think that was a big marketing ploy by British Petroleum back in the day. So I think they've really to put the responsibility back on the individual and maybe not do their part to actually tackle their own carbon emissions. And I mean, so there's so many ways to go about it. I think, and I think policy also plays a huge role in understanding and actually making moves to cap carbon emissions or to regulate the emissions in general, because I think just a handful of companies emit the most. And so yeah, I'm a little bit on the fence usually about the concept of carbon offsetting, and I think obviously it's a great thing to do, but I think it needs to be more embedded in a company's DNA and corporate social responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point and a cautionary tale. I think it's not meant to discourage the advancement of where offsetting is going, but to think about it as one piece of a much bigger systemic evolution that we need to think about. Yeah, Eric, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree very much with Katya on it. That I mean, you don't create a mess just so that you can clean it up, right? I mean, you start with, like I said, reducing offsets. I mean, reducing emissions. The offsets are a downstream solution for us. I mean, it's the supply chain and operations first and measurement. The offsets are the solution kind of as a last resort. Let's call it that. And it's funny because I'm a little bit torn. There's kind of two areas that we're talking about here. You know, as a former development worker, you know, I see the huge amount of social value to a lot of these offsetting projects. And I also see carbon offsets as a funding mechanism for some development agencies and project implementers, which are struggling to find funding, which was the case with some of the organizations I was working for. You know, and we could have been looking at some of our climate projects as in terms of the carbon absorption and the climate adaptation and mitigation properties that they had, and use that as a funding mechanism. So, you know, I think that this is basically like a voluntary carbon tax. So like what Katya was saying about in terms of policy, you know, there may come a time when carbon taxes and, you know, carbon credits are more worked into global economies. where, you know, we could, basically these types of funds will be worked into the cost of goods. But at the moment, I think that, you know, brands like us who are choosing to, you know, apply it ourselves, you know, it's one of the best ways that we can do it. They're not a perfect solution. You know, I'm no expert on the projects themselves, but of course there's leaks, you know, there's financial leaks, there's environmental leaks when you're going from, you know, it's not a perfect cleanup from, you know, emit in transportation from, you know, Indonesia to Canada, and then, you know, put money into an offset project and it all nets out. You know, I wouldn't be that naive to believe that that's the reality. So, I mean, look for low carbon solutions first, carbon offsets second, and, you know, hopefully we can see it as, you know, offsets plus, you know, the value, the social value of these offset projects. It may need to be, and I don't know what Casper and Esther think about this, it may need to be, you know, worked into the marketing pitch of offset projects so that we can actually see that dual value. Because it can be a tricky thing for a consumer, for example, in Canada, to see, you know, beyond the plant a tree type of offset project.
That's a really good point to kind of go beyond the simpler versions, but really ask consumers, project developers, and investors and other entities interested in participating to go beyond the simple low-hanging fruit, but kind of dive in and think about the system as a whole. A lot of what you said reminds me of the field that I deal with day to day, which is in the human rights monitoring space. It's very similar in the sense that, like, yeah, you could try to do remedy of grievances and issues that have come up from communities suffering from mining operations, or textile workers whose factory might have collapsed and now they're dealing with issues of you know, job security and health and safety. It's like you're cleaning up the mess, and yes, you're responsible for that mess, but you actually should have been monitoring these issues before the mess began. And how can you do that in a way that's productive, so you can mitigate the risk and lower those impacts before the mess cleanup has to begin? So it's an interesting parallel, and similar to kind of the new legislation we're seeing now about mandatory human rights due diligence in supply chains. We might be seeing more mandatory carbon offsetting. So we'll see where legislation takes us. But I think in the meantime, we still have to iron out the challenges of even kind of the assurance, the traceability, and the transparency around these kinds of projects. And that leads me to the next question about credibility. You know, there's of course projects that are so airtight and really well built and well positioned. And I'd like to hear a bit from Esther and Casper about how do these projects assure the due diligence aspect, so that we can make sure that the impact is right and the projects are delivering what they're supposed to deliver. And then what are some of the challenges in that, so that over time the carbon offsetting projects can just gain more credibility, have better standards, and we can close the loop, the gaps where they might exist. So I'd love to hear from the both of you. Maybe Esther, you can begin.
Sure. Thanks. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think credibility is really the utmost important thing of this whole sector. I think if that is not given, then we can actually pack up. So in that sense, I really believe what you also mentioned before already, that a really thorough due diligence process of all projects is really important. And even before you come to the actual certification of a project, but actually looking at risk factors on the ground for communities, looking at when you talk about land-based projects as topics as land tenure, community benefit sharing systems, if they're already in place, etc. So I think all these factors are really important to be done up front. I think to really secure also the long-term sustainability of the project, it's important to have also a base on the ground, and have really, when you actually manage a project, to have a full oversight of what is happening on the ground, to have people there. And this is what we at South Pole also always try to do. In addition, a profound auditing also of your local implementation partners, I think is really important. And then essentially, when it comes to the actual certification, to really partner with international standards as we do, as the UNFCCC Gold Standard VERA, where actually the eligibility criteria are profoundly checked and are third-party audited. And that here, not just looking at general requirements as permanence, additionality, of etc. of projects or leakage, but really look at the actual co-benefits and the positive impacts, which, as I mentioned before, by now already certified as well by these international standards. So I think that is really important. And I think really just always use best practice. We at South Pole, we're actually we are ICROA members of the International Carbon Reduction and Offset Association, where really we are also audited as a project developer against always implementing best practices in the sector.
Thank you. Thanks for providing that. Yeah, that's nobody wants to talk about due diligence and auditing. It's a boring topic, but it's one of the most important, because without that, as you say, the credibility is gone and the accountability can be questioned. So it's very important. And Casper, how do you integrate due diligence processes in your project development?
Well, as you put correctly, it is essential, because the craziest things used to happen. You would have projects in which they will sell an X amount of trees to one company and sell the carbon credits coming out of it to another. So you have all these kind of crazy examples. So crediting or certification is key. We also really believe in visualizing the data so that the end user can see it for themselves. So we really try to use geo information, satellite imagery, artificial intelligence to really show the impact, so that the user can actually get a sense of, okay, what is happening here. And I really liked what Eric said about it should be carbon credit plus, because just carbon isn't going to cut it anymore. We are working towards a system in which we all learn to speak the same language, which is, I believe, the language of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are used, of course, to give us all the same sense of, okay, what is it that we're trying to do, and how can we quantify it? How can we adjust metrics so that we can communicate with each other what it is that we do? So this is very important. And I think that to assure the credibility of the Carbon Credits Plus, you need to have incentives other than monetary incentives. People need to have an intrinsic feeling of wanting to change, wanting to add to that change, and really put in the work to make it happen.
Thanks for that insight. And I'd like to actually now do a quick final round of your feedback. If you can just share one brief success story. It's actually also one of the questions in our on the conferencing app. Like one story of where you've implemented a project and the kind of maybe impact that it's had on communities that you've been able to measure or observe. That would be great. And then we'll go into Q&A.
I guess I'll hop in. So I mentioned earlier on in the call that we started off with our company with a project, an NGO partner, which is the Sumatran Orangutan Society, who does great work in the looser ecosystem in Sumatra, which is the last place on Earth where Sumatran orangutans, Sumatran rhinos, tigers, and elephants all coexist. It's an extremely important ecosystem, and it's being torn apart, like I was saying, for wood pulp, which is going into fashion in some cases, for palm oil is a huge driver of it, paper is a huge driver of it. So this isn't a carbon offset project. However, we've 1% of our sales through 1% for the Planet go to this organization, and we have various other fundraising initiatives throughout the year. But this is one project where I've seen firsthand, and we visited the project and spent some time in the forest. So, I could say that amount of money going to this project, they're not only reforesting the rainforest. They're not like what they are. They are getting seedlings from the forest and replanting, and they have horticultural experts who are working with them. However, they're also training the communities who live on the edge of the primary forest to be able to reforest, to be able to run the nurseries for these seedlings, to be able to use sustainable agriculture techniques so that they don't have to be clearing forests to be able to make an income. And really, they've made that whole community that's living in the location that we visited into a really robust protector of the ecosystem. And it's instilled a lot more pride as well. So I would say that in that case, it's a success story because the funding that went in to reforestation really organized the community around the goal of and the recognition of how important that ecosystem is to them.
Yeah, I have a similar story to Eric's in terms of working with, it's a lot about also educating communities. In Cambodia specifically, there's a lot of issues of deforestation, first of all, and wildlife, need for wildlife preservation. And specifically, we did a project to protect wild honeybees and really teaching communities on how to harvest honeybees more ethically without using, fume gases and things like that, and to really empower communities to also create a source of income for them to be able to sell this wild honey harvest and to really understand the pride and the heritage that they have, and so that was one success story for us. And yeah, so it's really not specifically a carbon offsetting mission, but I think definitely as we grow, we're looking to offset all of our products themselves, and this is something that we're going to be working on with Green Story, and we're excited.
Great. And Esther and Casper, from the project development perspective, can you share like an on-the-ground field story where you could see the impact that the project was having?
Sure, absolutely. And I would actually really like to share more of a success story of a regional program we had co-created with one of our corporate partners in Latin America. And there we basically co-developed a revolving fund in 5 countries in Latin America. It was Peru, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, and Ecuador, where actually there was a clear focus on the natural habitat, first of all, of the jaguar. And that's why this program is called the Jaguar Connection Fund. And essentially around how the local communities exactly in that natural habitat and that biodiversity region could also engage in this program. So how basically this revolving fund works is that these different local communities and local organizations from these 5 countries could apply to the program. And when they were selected, they would basically receive upfront funding to actually implement this project. We, as a carbon project developer, would certify with a third party the project. And essentially the credits which would be issued from this program would be sold in the voluntary market, and the revenues would basically go back into the fund, so that actually the programs or the projects which are already existing could upscale, and in addition, new projects could be created. So this was the program is actually in the 2nd phase now, and is still running and open for applications. And here we really see a very positive impact, which is really upscaling across these various countries.
Very interesting. And Casper, how about your organization? What's your favorite project where you could track some impact?
Well, I thought that a great anecdote is when we first started in Rio Grande do Sul, which is the southernmost state of Brazil. And when we came there, the first thing we did was just talk to the people there, talk to different landowners, talk to different farmers, big and small. And they had enormous difficulties with understanding that we came to actually plant forest instead of cutting it down. And what we came to learn is that the community here, which is real gaucho cowboy community, they actually had a word for the existing forest, for the mata nativo, which translates to dirt. Because they couldn't get any revenue out of it, which was absurd for us because the small plots of forest were surrounded with degraded land, bare soil, and very little grass. So at one point we thought, okay, so let's make connection with the state government, and we got on the phone with the governor, and we called him and said, okay, so this is our plan. This is what we want to do. We want to reforest the pampas here. And he was just amazed. He was saying, this is the first time that I'm in the office that someone calls me to actually add trees instead of subtracting them. So he was very enthusiastic at the beginning. And I think that has given us such a boost to continue our quest. So that was really a good moment for us.
Yeah. It's you probably were the surprise of the century when a foreign entity comes into Latin America and actually wants to provide something and not take away. That's a great story. Well, thank you so much for all of your thoughts and insights. That kind of concludes the questions that I had, and I'll open it up to the questions from the audience. And I think Sebastian's question was mostly. We try to answer with these stories of favorite carbon offsetting projects. So I'll go to the next one, also from Sebastian, for Esther. He's curious to hear how you make sure that all the projects comply with recognized international standards. I think you spoke a little bit to that, but maybe you can share a few more details.
Sure. So I think indeed, as I mentioned before, we really make sure at South Pole that we'll be certified with accredited third-party standards and auditors. So this, I think, is already an important mechanism to make sure that no harm is done on local level, and actually also these best practices are implemented. I think in addition, and this is also something I mentioned already before, I think it's really crucial to always have a foot on the ground as a project developer, and have local insights in that the activities are actually carried out the way as originally set in the project. And as we I think all agreed before already, having a continuous dialogue with the actual local communities involved via local stakeholder consultation, etc.
Thanks. And Katja, I see you're typing in a response for Mamta's question. I wonder if you can kind of share a little bit of what you plan to answer with everyone. But the question is, with tracking and offsetting carbon, what is the age increase in cost of products, monetary, especially like the financial aspects of it?
Yeah. So. For us, I mean, if you're talking in terms of like shipping offsets, for us, you're really looking, I don't know, let me give an example with like a €100. It really depends. Basically, the shipping, the offsets will depend on the distance between the warehouse and the destination. But usually you're looking at under a US dollar additional fee. And since we give the option to our customers, we've noticed that the majority of them want to offset, even if that means they're going to pay, I don't know, 24 cents to 75 cents more. And so it's really quite affordable to do so, and which is even more, value to doing it.
And Eric, do you have any kind of estimates of the increase in costs in your product, and how really not only offsetting, but how creating a sustainable product from the design and from the materials has shown implications in the cost of the final product?
Yeah, great question, actually, because I'll try not to go too deep on the question of the cost of sustainability, because that's a key topic for any business in this space. You know, we obviously are applying rigorous, you know, business acumen as any business would to costing our products and to finding pricing that works for the consumer. It is, of course, more expensive in some cases to use sustainable materials. It's not in all cases, but you know, we see that as more of a true cost of the material, you know, because we are making sure that we're not, and I think that it's really important that sustainable businesses also make sure that they're not overpaying. There are a lot of materials out there. There's a lot of fabrics. There's a lot of packaging that can, you know, charge a lot based on the premium of sustainability, where actually you're not getting necessarily the value for money. And, you know, I think consumers really do need to see what they're paying for. So our piece of kind of transparency there has been always to share every supplier, every fabric mill, you know, even the names of the dyes that we use, where the packaging is coming from. So if we're using a tag that's handmade from, you know, post-consumer recycled paper in Bali, we're going to share that story, and that for us that adds value. You know, we're starting to use reusable cotton bags for shipping our garments in because we got sick of using bioplastic cassava-based bags. We just wanted to use something that had more of a long-term value and wasn't disposable, even if it was biodegradable. And so we share that process as well. And for us, that adds value. So in terms of carbon offsets and the pricing there, I mean, it's not expensive enough for us, to be honest. I mean, I don't, it has not been an impact on our business financially to offset our shipping or to offset our production. It's not significant. Using other processes, our packaging, you know, different marketing tools that we use, just everyday business is much more expensive than offsetting our projects. And that's, you know, it's an inconvenient kind of truth because sure, we feel great for doing it, but I do wonder sometimes, should carbon offsets be a little bit more expensive? And it's a strange question, but you know, if they're cheap, they're easy, and they might be too easy. And I think one of the questions was alluding to that. It might be too easy for companies to just buy offsets in bulk and wash their hands.
Yeah. So how do we make sure that as an industry, this becomes a last minute, like a last mile solution, and not the Band-Aid, which is easy to buy and go for, and without necessarily questioning the full integrity and how sustainability is you know, incorporated into the supply chain from the start. Yeah, Casper, you had a note to share. Yeah.
Yeah, because this is an interesting question, and I think there are multiple ways to look at it. Because, of course, for large companies, large industrial companies, they have a very high percentage of ratio of grams of CO2 to dollar earned. And for these companies, of course, the impact of offsetting will be a lot bigger. But I think, and maybe Katja, as a fellow economist, might agree that this is something, carbon is something that we should consider in all our investing strategies. It should have a certain price, and it should have a price that represents the negative externalities correctly. And that's the only way in which this is going to work. And so also for, I think that having insight in your emissions is the most important. Having a plan to reduce is equally important. But I would also say don't write off offsetting at the start, because at some point it could be worth your while to already start compensating a part while you're still working on reduction. And I think the most beautiful thing is that when you include this cost in your investment scenarios, that you will actually be nudged towards making the right decisions.
That's a great point, and it's a bit optimistic. I like it. I think we always, it's great that we're critically analyzing this topic from multiple lenses, but I think that's a really nice way to put it. So we have one more question, or time for one more question, and Anne is asking any of the panelists who want to share, how do you see the future of the voluntary carbon market, and how do you expect that to impact, change your business or organizations?
Well, I guess I've gone first on a lot, so I'll hop in. Nobody else was unmuting, but for me, I think that Esther and Casper probably have a lot more insight on this one in terms of carbon markets and especially how it works on the scale of big business. But I do think that it's going to become more expected from the consumer side that you not only offset, of course, but that you take responsibility for the kind of whole life cycle. We're seeing a little bit of that in Canada in terms of at least small moves towards producers taking on the cost of disposal of the products that they create. And, I think that type of mindset will be applied in the future. So it's going to be perhaps less voluntary, but, it'll definitely be expected that a producer of a product is going to take into account the emissions that product creates. And hopefully have elegant solutions for carbon absorption and carbon offsets. But, I think that right now we're seeing a way where you can say, I put up my hand, I'm going to offset all my products. I think it's going to be something that'll be much more integrated in the future. But yeah, I'd love to hear what Casper and Esther have to say too.
Yeah, I think you are completely right. What I think that is going to be a great challenge to supply and demand that will occur, because what we see luckily is that some companies start to hit the glass ceiling of, okay, we almost can't reduce anymore, so offsetting is now becoming a very real option for us. And I think more and more companies will do this, especially by 2030. So I think one of the great challenges is actually providing enough carbon credits to supply the market, and do this in a way where it still has reasonable pricing and is available to all, so that everyone can have a sense of a bit of ownership in this battle that we have.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with what both of you said, and I think this question also tackles on the latest discussion, which I think has been taking place in the sector a lot. Indeed, is there a future for carbon credits in the voluntary market as we know it now, in light of the Paris Agreement and in light of going over to a system where there will be potential trade more on bilateral national level? And would that mean that actually voluntary carbon and corporate engagement will die? Well, at least from our perspective at Southpole, my perspective, let's not let die the voluntary market until national governments have actually figured out the implementation of policies which are taking place now. I think that would definitely do harm indeed to the local communities we're trying to support this year with. It's definitely something we're closely monitoring, and I think the sector is very much involved also in these governmental discussions. But we definitely see still a future here for the voluntary market, if it's in form of an issued carbon credit, or if it will be some sort of other certificate in the future. That can definitely be adjusted, but I think that should not limit or stop engagement and reduce emissions.
Thank you so much. This was super fruitful and inspiring, and I wanted to thank all of our panelists, and I will pass it over to Akil to close our session.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Vera. That is such an interesting discussion, and I really like kind of the duality of like people putting offsets as kind of a freebie versus really all the benefits that come from offsets, because people, it's not just an equation, like you emit carbon and then you absorb carbon. There is other impacts to it. And what I particularly like, and I put a basic poll out there on the alignment of SDGs, and I think that framework that SDGs provide when applied to offsets is a great way to think about it as well, because it is a multi-dimensional thing. And when it comes to climate solutions, there's never a silver bullet. There's always going to be many different things that need to be applied to actually get to where we want to go. That being said, again, thank you to everyone on the panel. That is such an interesting conversation and a really engaged audience. I love the questions that kept pouring in, and I know we didn't get to all of them, so we will be sharing the questions out with with the panel here, but also answering them on social media as and when we can. And there will be a replay of the system as well. That's going to be available very soon. So do keep an eye out. I think pretty much after this event is over, you should be able to see it. I'm just going to leave everyone with this last slide. So this is not the end of the Offsets webinar series. We have 3 more coming up with a lot of amazing speakers and a lot of people who will be talking about this. I believe tomorrow, surprise, is the UN SDG panel. So we are going to be talking about offsets and the alignment of SDGs tomorrow, and hearing from a lot more brands as well as people involved in the space. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you Vera, Esther, Casper, Eric, and Katya for an amazing session, and I'll see you all tomorrow, hopefully. Take care.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Good day.